In everyday life, when the noise of the world fades and we are left only with our own thoughts, an uncomfortable yet revealing question sometimes arises. Why do some people have no friends? This is not only a social phenomenon, but also has a deeper psychological and spiritual meaning. It is not merely about the absence of company, but about what this solitude reveals about the inner world of the person. Carl Jung showed us that what we experience outwardly is always a reflection of our inner self. The absence of friendships is therefore not an empty coincidence, but a sign, a symbol, an expression of unconscious processes that we often do not immediately understand. Some people withdraw because old wounds have left invisible scars. Others prefer to keep their distance because they perceive the outside world as too loud and chaotic. And still others quietly search for another way, for a more authentic life closer to what is essential, even if that means separating from the crowd. When someone has no friends, it is not only a social situation but also a window into the soul. A window that reveals old wounds, longings, fears, but also hidden strengths that over time can transform into gifts. From a Jungian perspective, loneliness is never a coincidence. It is the language of the unconscious, urging us to look deeper and to recognize in ourselves what we have repressed or forgotten. Perhaps, just perhaps, the absence of external relationships drives us to build the most important connection of all, the one with ourselves. The absence of friends does not mean that someone is unworthy of them or lacks human qualities. Usually, there are deeper roots in the unconscious. In Jungian psychology, we understand that childhood already lays the foundation. A child who is not seen or understood quickly internalizes the thought that their feelings are not valuable. Later, this becomes an adult who remains silent, withdraws, and builds an invisible protective wall. The experience of rejection can also play a major role. Those who have experienced exclusion, ridicule, or abandonment often develop the reflex to isolate themselves so as not to be hurt again. It is as if the soul, out of fear of new pain, prefers the protection of solitude over the uncertainty of human closeness. And sometimes the reason lies in a difference in the level of consciousness. There are people whose inner world is so deep that they cannot relate to superficial conversations. They seek genuine, rare connections in a world often dominated by the trivial. Therefore, the absence of friendships is not merely a social deficit. It is an expression of inner processes, of old wounds, unrecognized fears, but also of a special sensitivity. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not arise from not having people around you, but from being unable to share what matters to you." So, when we see someone living without friends, we should look beyond the surface. Behind this apparent emptiness often lies a rich inner life, a mirror of invisible struggles fought in silence. And often what looks like a lack is in truth a deep call of the soul for a more authentic and conscious life. The absence of friendships is not only a social fact, but a symbol deeply rooted in our psyche. Loneliness is more than a random state. It is an archetypal image that accompanies a person on the journey towards self-knowledge. In many spiritual and mythological traditions, we encounter the figure of the hermit who withdraws from the world to dive into the depths of his own soul. This archetype appears in stories, legends, and even in the tarot, where the old man with the lamp symbolizes the search for the inner light. It is no coincidence that many people without friendships experience similar things even if they are not consciously aware of it. Something leads them onto the path of introspection that their soul demands. Loneliness, when lived involuntarily, can feel like a heavy burden, like an empty space full of unanswered questions. Yet, when its symbolic dimension is recognized, it reveals itself as a necessary stage in the process of individuation. Whoever remains without the constant distraction of external noise comes face to face with their own shadow, their fears, wounds, but also their unused potential. The collective unconscious speaks in symbols, and loneliness is one of them. It is a call for retreat, for silence, for an encounter with what cannot be heard in the clamor of society. Just as the mythological hero must pass through a desert, a cave, or the dark night before reaching his goal, so too does the modern human experience loneliness as a kind of initiation, something that at first glance seems like social failure. Having no friends can, on a deeper level, be a rite of passage, The psyche creates conditions in which the person is forced to look inward, even if they neither understand nor accept it at first. It is as if the soul says, "Now is the moment to listen to yourself before you can truly meet others." When someone in my practice said, "Doctor, I have no friends. I feel alone," I did not see only the absence, but the seed of a possible transformation. I saw the chance that this person, in the midst of their apparent withdrawal, might discover parts of themselves they would never have known in constant company. Properly understood, loneliness opens the door to authenticity and inner freedom. What looks like weakness to society can be a step toward inner strength for the soul. When a person manages to integrate their shadow and make peace with themselves, future relationships will no longer be superficial, but real connections born from their true inner strength. At first, it often feels painful. In a society that measures a person's worth by the number of their contacts, the absence of friends looks like a personal failure. But from a deeper psychological perspective, it is not a mistake, but a calling. The soul expresses its inner necessity for transformation in this way. It does not speak in words, but in symbols, circumstances, and coincidences that force the conscious self to pause. Just as dreams send encrypted messages to restore our balance, so too is external life a mirror of what we need to understand. The absence of friendships can be such a message, a sign from the psyche that it is time to let the masks fall and encounter yourself. In my clinical observations, I have often seen many who suffered from loneliness were not incapable of maintaining relationships. Their inner being was simply in a larger process. It was as if their unconscious protected them from superficial contacts in order to send them on a deeper quest. This solitude was not punishment, but rather a kind of spiritual incubation period. The absence of friends can show that life demands more authenticity from a person, something he has so far suppressed out of fear or conformity. When he can no longer wear the masks, the forced relationships fall apart, and loneliness remains. Yet within it lies the seed of the real. This process belongs to the path of individuation. Whoever has no friends or feels excluded often experiences the phase in which the unconscious demands that he become himself instead of a copy of what others expect. It is an invitation to shed the old skin like a snake and be reborn with an identity that corresponds to one's inner truth. In many myths, we see that heroes must first go into exile. Moses spent time in the desert. Buddha withdrew into solitude before he was enlightened. And even Christ lived 40 days in isolation before he began his mission. These stories show isolation is not a sign of defeat but the harbinger of a revelation. The soul separates us from the superficial in order to lead us to the essential. The absence of friends can thus be a sign that an inner meaning is waiting to be discovered, a meaning that requires silence, reflection, and the courage to be alone. It is not about renouncing human closeness forever, but about ensuring that the relationships that arise afterwards are genuine, carried by authenticity, and not by the desire to belong. For loneliness teaches us a truth that many shy away from. Sometimes we must lose ourselves in the darkness in order to find the light that can only emerge from the deepest layers of the soul. The loneliness that arises from the absence of friends confronts us not only with the silence of the outer world, but also with an inner mirror in which something even more disturbing appears: our shadow side. I have often said that the shadow is those parts of the personality we have repressed, rejected, or denied because they did not fit the image we wanted to show. But everything we reject does not disappear. It retreats into the unconscious and waits there for the moment to reappear. When someone goes through a phase without friends, without social distractions and superficial ties, the psyche creates the conditions for the shadow to become more visible. In the silence, suppressed feelings begin to rise: sadness, anger, envy, fear, old resentment, and even desires one never dared to accept. The constant noise of social life usually drowns out these voices, but when the outer world falls silent, they speak all the louder. Many fear this moment because it is hard to face one's own shadow. The conscious ego, which likes to identify with what is bright and acceptable, resists recognizing that vulnerability, aggression, or loneliness are also part of us. Yet here lies one of the great paradoxes of depth psychology. Only when we accept the shadow and enter into dialogue with it does true transformation begin. Having no friends can therefore be a scenario created by fate to prevent avoiding this inevitable meeting. Isolation takes away our escape routes, tears down social masks, and forces us to truly see ourselves. Pain then becomes the teacher. Every repressed feeling that surfaces is actually a part of our psyche that wants to be heard and reconciled. I have often observed in patients that the darkest moment of their lives, the one in which they felt the crushing weight of having no one at their side, was also the threshold of an awakening. Behind every painful emotion lay a symbol. Anger showed the need for justice. Sadness, the call for self-love. Envy pointed to unused potential, and fear marked the field of inner growth. Loneliness strips a person bare and confronts him with his truth. He can no longer blame the environment nor escape into company. He must acknowledge that what torments him also lives within himself. And in this painful recognition, in the courage to face the shadow, integration begins. Like the mythical hero who must descend into the depths and face the dragon before finding the treasure. So, the absence of friends leads us into a symbolic descent into the caves of the inner world. This dragon is nothing other than our shadow. Fears, guilt, insecurities. What at first seems like punishment is in reality the necessary condition for wholeness. For ultimately, the shadow is not an enemy but unrecognized energy. When we accept it, this energy transforms into creativity, wisdom, and freedom. Thus, loneliness ceases to be a mere nothingness and becomes a crucible in which the old fades away and the new is born. The absence of friends is then not a cruel fate, but a sign that it is time to make peace with oneself. The life that deprives us of external company leads us to the only company we can never lose, our whole self with light and shadow. Whoever crosses the desert of loneliness and confronts his shadow feels that something quietly transforms within. This phase, painful as it may be, acts like an alchemical process. What looks like loss turns out to be initiation. The first transformation happens within. Whoever has endured loneliness without running away from it learns to listen to himself. He becomes an observer of his own thoughts, feelings, and wounds. He discovers that he can endure his own company, and that within him lies a source of creativity, intuition, and wisdom previously drowned out by the noise of the world. This path resembles the myth of the phoenix. After burning in the fire of loneliness and the struggle with the shadow, man rises again from his own ashes, not to be the same as before, but to return with deeper awareness and an identity less dependent on external validation. And it is precisely in this rebirth that the possibility arises to build truly authentic relationships. The reason is simple. Previously, many social bonds were formed out of unconscious needs from inner voids, unrecognized wounds, or fear of loneliness. Friendships serve to fill gaps, avoid the shadow, or escape from oneself. After such a phase of introspection, however, the motivation changes fundamentally. Relationships no longer arise out of fear or lack, but out of inner abundance and freedom. In my clinical work, I have often observed that after a period of isolation, people draw different kinds of relationships into their lives. They no longer seek the crowd that distracts, but the encounter that nourishes. They are no longer satisfied with superficialities, but long for connections that allow growth, that share truth, and that accompany the path toward individuation. In other words, the pain of having no friends prepares the soul to find the right ones. What is fascinating is that this process changes not only the way we deal with others, but also our relationship to the world as a whole. Whoever has learned to be alone does not fear silence, rejection, or abandonment. He knows he can carry himself, and from this inner security he opens with fewer masks and more authenticity. It is as if such a person develops an invisible magnet. He no longer attracts out of need but from the truth of his being. And this authenticity resonates with other souls who have also walked the path of self-knowledge. Thus, after a phase of loneliness, deep friendships, meaningful bonds, or even love relationships often arise, marked by honesty and maturity that were previously impossible. Symbolically speaking, loneliness acts like a portal. At first it forces a descent into the shadow world. Then it allows us to re-emerge with a new, pure, and more conscious light. This light becomes the inner compass by which a person also chooses his companions. What at first seems like punishment turns out to be a path of learning. The absence of friends transforms into an initiation that cleanses and prepares the field for the new. And although this process is neither immediate nor painless, it is one of the deepest paths to inner freedom and to more lasting, truer relationships. If one views human experience from the perspective of the unconscious, one sees that nothing happens without meaning, even if on the surface it may appear so. Even that which hurts, like loneliness or phases without friends, carries within it a hidden purpose, a lesson the soul needs on its way to wholeness. The conscious ego, however, often misunderstands prolonged loneliness. The ego, accustomed to company and recognition, sees it as failure, a lack that must be immediately corrected. But in truth, something deeper is happening, a call from the unconscious for inner transformation. The psyche sometimes leads us away from external noise so that we may hear the voices within. In my research and in the stories of patients, I have seen that loneliness acts like a secret laboratory of the spirit. There, free from distractions, the essential questions arise. Who am I really? What is the meaning of my existence? What gives my life direction? Such questions cannot be answered in crowds or through social approval, only in the intimacy of one's own soul. It is precisely in such phases that a new relationship with the spiritual begins to unfold. A person discovers that he is not truly alone, but accompanied by something greater, the collective unconscious universal archetypes. Ancient wisdom revealed through symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. It is as if with the closing of an external door, another opens, inward, into the eternal. The soul needs silence to awaken. Without silence, there is no deep listening. Without listening, no revelation. What seems like emptiness is, in truth, a sacred space preparing the divine. That is why it is no coincidence that loneliness has been indispensable in all spiritual traditions. Prophets, sages, and initiates pass through long desert times, retreats into mountains or periods of silence. They knew only in the absence of noise can the deepest truth reveal itself. In this sense, the absence of friends can be understood as an initiatory path, as a symbol that the soul is being called to look beyond the surface of life. Whoever has learned to carry himself in loneliness, whoever has discovered inner wealth without external company, is no longer dependent on the outside to feel fulfilled. He finds his center in the bond with the eternal, with what we call God, the self or the wholeness of the psyche. And what is astonishing is this contact with the spiritual does not come as theory or dogma from outside, but reveals itself in living experiences, all in a dream full of archetypal images, in a chance encounter that illuminates the path, or in an inner sense of companionship even in the darkest hour. Man realizes, there is something in me that does not die, does not break, that remains unshakable despite losses and absences. In this sense, loneliness is ultimately a spiritual teacher. It takes away the superfluous, confronts us with our fragility, and at the same time, connects us with a source of strength that goes beyond the human. The ego may suffer, but the soul recognizes it is preparation for a life that is truer, more conscious, and more deeply rooted in the sacred that dwells in every person. I have learned in my life what man fears most is often exactly what he most needs. Loneliness, as much as consciousness rejects it, is one of those mysteries. Many flee from it, into distractions, into superficial attachments, into external noise so as not to hear the inner voice. But those who have no friends, or who are taken by fate out of social circles, stand at a threshold, the threshold of their own transformation. Loneliness is not a sentence of punishment. It is initiation, the silent ritual the psyche prepares for those who must find the way to their truest self. For only one who dares to remain with himself discovers the depth of his soul. Individuation, the central process of my work, does not happen in the crowd, but in inner gathering. It is a journey toward wholeness in which we learn to reconcile the opposing parts of our psyche, shadow and light, the feminine and the masculine, the conscious and the unconscious. When life takes away external friendships, it gives you the chance to cultivate the most important friendship of all, the friendship with yourself. And no bond is more necessary than this, for from it grows the ability to truly love and live relationships without dependence, without manipulation, and without submission. Whoever has found himself in loneliness will later no longer seek in society for completion through others, but will share from his inner fullness. Loneliness shows us that true freedom does not mean being able to do everything we want, but to truly be what we are without masks, without roles. It frees us from the tyranny of what will people say, from the fear of rejection, and from the compulsion to constantly please. In this empty space without external companionship, we discover that life can be full of meaning. As soon as we stop searching outside for what can only be found within and the deepest truth, loneliness opens the door to the eternal. There, where the noise of the world falls silent, the self begins to whisper. That inner core that connects us with the divine. We realize that we were never truly alone. There was always something greater, a meaning that surpasses and guides us, even if we do not fully understand it. Therefore, having no friends does not mean being condemned to bitterness, but standing at the threshold of awakening. It means that your life invites you to walk through the dark night in order to discover the light within yourself. This light is your truth, your essence, your destiny. Thus, loneliness ceases to be a burden and becomes a privilege. The privilege of knowing yourself, transforming, and being reborn. Whoever realizes this understands what looked like absence was in reality a deeper presence. The presence of your own. Don't forget to subscribe. The Wisdom Archive.